Luck here. So I've got my bees or about to. Now what? Those of you who don't know, fairly recently I've had a book published, well, 6 or 8 years now, something like that, Beekeeping a Practical Guide, which was originally intended for those who hadn't got bees yet or were about to. So really this group. It has got the same title as another one, an American book, but that's what the publishers insisted on. So it's also quite a good book for moving on through your beekeeping. I've had people keep bees 20 years tell me that they still get quite a lot from it. There is a beekeeping website called Dave Cushman's website, which is reckoned to be the world's most comprehensive beekeeping website. There's an awful lot of very sound information in there. It was originally started by a man who was invalided. He really couldn't work. And he died 10 years ago and left it to me in his will, and I'm keeping it going. So what's the presentation about? Well, it's to give really good sound start to beekeepers, certainly in their early years or about to, because in my view, beginners need a lot of initial guidance. They come into beekeeping and all of a sudden they're hit with things straight away. And if they can have a reasonable idea of what beekeeping is about, it will certainly help them. You've got to remember that beekeeping isn't really like anything else. It is stockmanship, really, because basically what you've got as a beehive is basically a box of animal. It's not like gardening or anything like that, because if you, let's say, prune an apple tree wrong and cut out all the fruit bud, so what? The tree will recover, and a couple of 3 years time, you're back to where you started. That doesn't happen, of course, with a hive of bees. I'm only briefly going to cover topics here in this presentation. There will be more in later webinars. In fact, there's a slightly more advanced one, which will be on at 7:30 this evening, which I suggest that if you've already got bees, that you log into that one as well. Everything there, of course, will be in a greater depth than I can do here. Now, there may be duplication with some of the slides that you are either seen before or you see in other presentations. That's because I've got a lot of presentations and I tend to use the same slide. Sometimes for make the same point, or perhaps make another point, not the opposite view, but to make another point. What I've done here is I've put this presentation together assuming there's no COVID restrictions. We don't know how long they're going to last. As a complete layman, my guess is most of this summer anyway. But some of the things I'm going to say will probably mean you contacting your local beekeeping association. So I'm assuming that is going to happen. A tiny bit about me, not that it's too much to know anyway, but so you know where I'm coming from. I started beekeeping in 1963, and at one stage, for about 15 years, I had 130 colonies. So I was using beekeeping for part of my living. I considered I was semi-commercial. For the last 15 years or so, I've been the manager and one of the demonstrators at my local association, which is Whisper Green Beekeeping Association in West Sussex. And I've been the manager of the teaching apiary there for that time. So I know really what people in your level need. I've been teaching and demonstrating since the early 1970s, and I do quite a lot of writing, speaking, all sorts of things over quite a wide area. Despite the fact I've been keeping bees 56 years or so, I'm still absolutely passionate about the craft. And if anyone reckons they're more passionate than me, about beekeeping, treat them with a certain amount of suspicion. I can tell you, folks, that I am still learning. Bees are still teaching me things that I didn't know anything about. So, who is this webinar for? Well, it's either beekeepers in waiting who are about to press a button, or perhaps up to about 2 years of keeping bees. Now, that's quite a difficult thing to gauge, because some people who've been keeping bees only a couple of years are way ahead of some others who've been keeping bees 10, 15, or even 20 years. So it's a very difficult thing to gauge. But personally, I think this is an incredibly important sector because everybody's got to go through it. And although some may drop out, the future of the craft is there. And they're the ones we've got to look after. And that's why I'm really concerned that beginners have good teaching. I try to make sure they have good support, good attention, lots of help if they need it. And certainly at Whisper Green, I'll try to make sure they have good teachers, the best teachers as well. I try not to be critical, but I do come across some instances where last year's beginners teaches this year's beginners, which quite frankly, they just haven't got enough experience. And really, they do need quite a lot of teaching themselves, or learning, whichever way you want to look at it. Whatever your own situation, personally, I reckon beekeeping is fun. And if I was a lot better known than I am, then that could probably be a catchphrase. So why this webinar then? Well, it's because new beekeepers can have early issues. They can have things hit them almost straight away. Some may not recognise if they have got a problem. Others, perhaps the other way around, may well be unnecessarily concerned. And this is why I think people need a lot of help. And over the years, I've seen people come, or new beekeepers really come up against all sorts of problems, and they do need some things they've got to do quite early. It could be perhaps moving bees. They might have bought a colony or a couple of colonies for 2 or 3 villages away or whatever, 10 miles or more. They've got to move them immediately. So they need to know a little bit about that. Yes, they can probably have help, but they still need a rough idea of what they ought to be doing. All colonies need checking for disease, so you need a little bit of knowledge about that. And I don't want to put the wind up anyone, but I've seen ever so many colonies that have been sold or given away that have got notifiable diseases. They could swarm almost straight away. And I've seen ever so many colonies that have been sold with swarm cells in. On a few occasions, I've seen colonies sold, virtually no food in the colony, so it could be on the starvation straight away. And there's no fun being a beginner if you've got to deal with all these sort of things straight away. There's loads more as well. Now, I reckon we need to be much better beekeepers than beekeepers were in the past. There's lots of things that affect modern beekeepers that didn't affect beekeepers when I started keeping bees. In fact, when I started keeping bees, there were a lot of what were termed let alone beekeepers. I just put the supers on in April, 2 or 3, 4, perhaps 4 supers on in April, took them off in August, and that was their beekeeping. You can't do that now and be sure you're going to have a colony that's alive at the end of it. in my view, the best teachers don't have two legs and they stand in front of a screen or in front of an audience or in front of other beekeepers. The best teachers have got 6 legs and they've got 4 wings. What we need to do is to get beekeepers into the state where they can understand what those what they're being told and interpret it. A lot of beekeepers don't seem to realise that they develop their own sort of system, their own method, and they probably handle bees almost the same way, but they don't realise that they've got a system or way of doing it. As you go through beekeeping, you will develop ways of doing things, and you'll probably be very adaptable as you go through. What I do know is that habits, both good and not so good, are formed very early, or usually are, and very often they're very, very difficult to get people to change as well. No, that's the way I've always done it, or that's the way I was taught, or whatever. And they don't seem to be open to perhaps fresh ideas, that perhaps ways of doing things that could make it either easy on themselves or better on the bees. But in my view, good beekeepers need to be confident. They're confident of what they're doing. They're confident of their knowledge, and go and do things rather than, I'm not sure if I should do this or not. They need to be competent and responsible as well. Because very often in beekeeping, you need to do things, you need to do it at a certain time. Otherwise, if you don't, then somebody else might have half your bees in their garden. I'll put learning down here because I could put teaching, but I see it as a sort of push and pull situation. The teaching is pushing information out. The learning is pulling, which is sort of absorbing information, taking that and then doing something with it. You can teach as much as you like, but the learning, in my opinion, is probably far more important. Where? Well, if your local beekeeping association has got a teaching apiary, that's an excellent place to go, because I think you learn far more at a hive, get your head stuck in a beehive, than you will from any books, any classroom presentation, even webinars of this type. If you've got bees in front of you, a colony of bees is telling you something all the time, even if it's, we're doing fine, we don't need you, clear off. I don't want to get involved in local politics at all, but if you've got a teaching apiary where you're allowed to handle a colony entirely on your own, then that is probably the best way to learn, with a bit of guidance from somebody else. I do come across quite a lot of beekeeping associations where it's only the demonstrator allowed to handle the bees, not the members or the beekeepers. And I remember speaking to a lady at the National Honey Show 3 years ago now. National Honey Show is in October. Spoke to him. She sounded a really nice lady. I believe she was involved with farming. She had a small holding or something like that. And looking at her hand, she was a worker. And she said that she'd been going along to her own local association for 2 solid summers, and she hadn't actually handled a colony of bees on her own yet. They wouldn't let them, because it's one of those associations that just a demonstration handles the bees. Anyway, I don't know who it was, so I don't want to be critical. But if you're not handling bees, you're not learning very fast. If you possibly can, get hold of a really experienced, knowledgeable beekeeper. Now, that's actually quite difficult to work out, certainly as as an inexperienced beekeeper yourself. But sometimes you can work out if somebody's giving you any duff information or not. And I'm afraid there are an awful lot of what I call 20-minute experts in beekeeping. They buy a hive of bees, get all the kit, read a book, and they know it all. They're usually the noisy ones, so I would back off them a little bit if I was you. But you do exactly what you like where you are. Information's quite handy, really. I'm a great believer in doesn't matter what you're told, challenge it. I don't mean openly, but once you get a reasonable amount of knowledge and experience, sometimes you can work out quite easily if somebody tells you something, if it actually suits, or if it's right, or if it suits. Sometimes people just read something and they think that's it. Somebody might tell you something that's not really suitable for your area, but it might be for another area. You don't have to openly, but think to yourself when you get home or on the way home or whatever. Just think to yourself: is this correct or not? I'm afraid there's an awful lot of what I call beekeeping by numbers. That in the second week of May you do so and so. The third week of June, you do so and so. Well, beekeeping isn't actually like that because you get different seasons, you get different areas, even different parts of the world, and similarly, you won't learn very much from social media or YouTube unless perhaps it's something that is relevant to your area. I don't get involved in social media at all, but I've been told some of the stuff that's on there, and I don't look too much at YouTube these days. I used to, and there are some good information on there, but there's also some that's irrelevant or perhaps put on there by beginners who might make you think that they're more knowledgeable than they are. Beekeeping just isn't like that. Beekeeping is really a practical subject, and I think you're going to learn far more by getting your head stuck into a beehive and get your hands covered in propolis. If you can, try to avoid any foreign material, books, websites, videos, all sorts of things like that. There's good reasons for that, because there's a lot of different things. And the way somebody keeps bees, perhaps in California, isn't going to be the same as they do in Kentucky, isn't going to be the same as in Connemara or the Welsh Hills or East Anglia. Conditions vary quite a bit. Different kinds of bees, certainly different hives, perhaps different ways of managing the bees, and above all, probably different legislation. So if you go online or onto a forum or something like that, and somebody says, "Oh, douse the bees with so and so," it may well not be registered in this country, or your country rather, and you may be committing an offence. So I would avoid that. When you get a few more bee miles under your belt, then fine. You can go and find out what other people are doing in other places. Sometimes you can come up against things that are you might be able to modify a bit to suit your situation. Here's some simple questions for you. And all those that are watching, just give yourself instant numbers. How many bees in a hive? How many eggs does a queen lay in a day? How long does a worker bee live? And I would guess that you probably all got a figure for that, simply because that's probably what you've been told. But these really are examples of the sort of standard information that's put out very often on amazing facts of bees and those sort of things. is what I call the fluffy side of beekeeping, but it would depend on the type of bee, the climate, the conditions, or whether it's winter or summer, a type of hive, all the rest of it. Has anybody ever checked? They probably haven't. They've just guessed it all. And it does vary anyway, but they accept it because it's been written. And that is one of the main problems, I think, with learning in beekeeping, because people assume if something's written down, it's going to be correct for them in their situation. So let's just have a look at bees now. Bees aren't bees, aren't bees. And there's still a lot of beekeepers who seem to think, oh, they're all the same. They're actually not. They vary considerably. There are lots of different subspecies. There are about 28 throughout the world. Even the scientists can't quite make their minds up, but around about 28. Some of them have got very, very prolific queens. Certainly those, the further south they are, in general, the more prolific queens are. Now, you might think, oh, having a prolific queen, that sounds wonderful. It may not be in our part of the world. Yes, where something evolved, but not necessarily here. There are problems. They do produce huge colonies, which you'd expect, because prolific queens lay a lot of eggs. And that's what obviously prolific means in that context. If they've got a huge colony, that is relevance to the size of hive you need. So it's not quite so not quite so simple. Now, it might be easy to think, oh, if you've got prolific queens, you get a big colony, you get more honey. Well, probably it does, where these other bees evolved, usually sort of southern Europe. That's fine, no problem there, because they've got the conditions which it suits. But certainly in our part of the globe, in my experience, more bees doesn't always mean more honey. Might in a very, very good hot summer, but not usually. And the reason for that is bees turn, if you've got the queen lays a lot of eggs, you get a lot of brood, and what happens is if the weather's poor, the bees may turn that food into brood, because of course the brood needs a feeding. So it needs heavier feeding and possibly starvation, and that's one of the reasons the National Bee Unit put out warnings virtually every year now about starvation. It's simply because people are using prolific queens that produce colonies that need a lot of feeding. So bees and queens, then, I advise strongly to avoid buying imports if you possibly can. Now, you should know that because they should be advertised as imports. They may have well-known issues, such as bringing in pest diseases and pathogens that perhaps we haven't got. They may not suit the locality, because don't forget they evolved in other parts of the world to suit what the environment that they've got there. And very often when imports come in, because they're different subspecies than most of what we've got, when they cross, so not the next generation, but the one after that, usually you can get aggression. It's not in every colony. It's reckoned to be about 1 in 4, but that's that's enough. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of beekeepers change their queens regularly. Recent scientific paper has shown there's a higher disease level in imported bees, or recently imported bees anyway. So I'm advising you, if you possibly can, to get your bees locally from local beekeepers with local queens that have actually been bred in this country from local stock, not bred from imported stock. There's plenty available. We've got in England and Wales alone, as forgetting Scotland and Ireland and all the other places, we've got about 250,000 colonies, and there's more than enough to produce the bees that require. So that's enough about bees. I think beekeepers should know what I call the basics, which are the simple factual things, not opinions, simple factual things that that will help you keep your bees better. Beekeepers really need to know what's happening inside the colony, because it helps them understand the various methods that have been advised, what they're trying to achieve. So don't just blindly do as you're told. If somebody says, "Oh, add a super or give another frame of foundation," or something like that, try to work out what that is looking to achieve. So basics are what I call life cycle of the queen, drone and worker. They are quite important, nice and easy to learn straight away, and I will deal with that in a few slides. It's important to recognise good, healthy bees and brood, because we have got diseases, some of which are notifiable, and you need to know if they if your bees contract them. Now, I tend to suggest to people, rather than look deliberately for disease, if you can recognise what good, healthy bees and brood looks like, anything that looks wrong, then investigate it at that point. You need to be able to identify certainly 2 notifiable diseases: AFB, which is short for American foul brood, EFB, which is short for European foul brood. Those 2 are notifiable, so beekeepers have got to notify the authorities if they have a problem. Chalk brood is a fairly common disease, but in certain instances it can look a little bit like EFB. So you need to know that that's not really a problem, and know how to deal with them, because AFB and EFB, we have a bee inspection service, which I'll talk about a bit later. They will need to know. Learning the life cycle and treatments for Varroa is quite important. A lot of beekeepers just zap them with this or zap them with that or whatever, without actually trying to work out what they're trying to do. It's easy enough. Information on Dave Cushman's website, or in several places as well. Treatments for Varroa could be hard or soft chemical treatments, or it could even be management methods. You can reduce Varroa to manageable levels without any chemicals at all. You need to understand that Varroa vectors viruses as well. So if your Varroa levels are quite high, then you could have viruses, which is another problem. You need to know what's happening in the colony when it's preparing to swarm, because there are lots of swarm control methods, and you need to know what you're trying to do in order to prevent swarming. Now, pheromones, I won't say too much about that, but you need to know it's helpful to know a little bit about their role. A simple thing: the queen gives off pheromones. If you take her away from a colony for whatever reason, those pheromones very quickly diminish, and the bees realise that she's no longer there, and then they take steps to replace her. Quite a lot of what goes on inside a beehive is driven by pheromones, and you don't need to go into any great depth. Just work out what they're trying to do. A simple one is there are little glands on the feet of queens, and they put a pheromone called footprint pheromone on the comb as she's walking across. So if that's missing, then the bees know there's something on. It's just a simple level. It helps as a beekeeper to be able to see eggs and young larvae. Now, I know a lot of people can't, and they seem to think it's sort of amusing that they can't. I can never see eggs, or I can never see young larvae or whatever. Well, there's a reason for it, and it may well be one or two things. One is that in order to see eggs best, I find it's better to have light coming over your shoulder. If you're holding the frame in front of you, have light coming over your shoulder so it's shining into the base of the cells. You might have to move the frame around just a little bit. So it's light that I think is one of the problems. If people perhaps face the sun, the bottom of the cells are dark and people can't see. It's difficult to see. The other thing is, it's surprising how some people's eyes aren't as good as they think they are. That's okay. All you need is just one of these cheap magnifying glasses, the sort of thing you can get at market store, whatever, for 50p or £1. Or I find those Fresnel lenses are very useful too, and you can sort of keep in your box, and they don't take up any room, and they're very useful bits of kit. It's handy to know the age of larva too. An instance is if the queen perhaps stop laying. Sometimes it's handy to know how long she's been stopped laying. So if you know what size the larvae are, then you can gauge how long the queen's gone. And an easy way of doing it is when you get the opportunity, as you very often do during the summer, where perhaps you take a queen away from a colony, check it every day and have a look what I'll tell you in a minute that for the first 3 days, they're eggs. After that, it's larvae. But certainly after 3 days, if you do it every day, just have a look at the smallest larva. And if the queen's been gone 4 days, 5 days, 6 days or whatever, you'll very soon pick up how large a 3-day-old larva or a 5-day-old larva or a 7-day-old larva is. You can learn so much yourself without being taught. Finding queens seems to be a massive problem for some beekeepers. I can never find queens. That, I think, is a problem. They're beaten before they start. They just make up their mind they can't find queens. Just be positive and make up your mind you're going to find queens. Develop your own way of doing it, because different beekeepers have got different techniques, and some spot them straight away. Others have got to look for them. It's difficult for me to explain here how to do it, but you'll probably find your own way of doing it. Clipping and marking queens. Why do we clip queens? Well, we clip the wings or one wing to prevent them flying. If they can't fly, they can't swarm. You may hear from some people that clipping a queen's wing stops swarming. What it does, it delays swarming for a few days. That is all. But it does help you manage the situation a lot better. And it could mean that it probably gives you another 4, 5, or perhaps at the most 6 days. So if perhaps you're a weekend beekeeper, it might mean that you haven't lost a swarm. Marking queens, I think, is quite a difficult one. Experienced beekeepers mark queens so that they can spot them easier. At Whisper Green teaching apiary, what I do is I only mark half the queens because I want people looking for queens rather than a yellow mark or a green mark or whatever. So if you really want to improve your beekeeping and improve your queen finding skills, it may be that you shouldn't mark them. Assessing colonies, I won't say too much about now, but it's something that I don't think beekeepers do anywhere near enough. Because if we're raising queens from our existing stock, it's much better if we raise them from the better colonies rather than the poorer colonies. So just get into the habit right from the very start of just basically assessing your colonies. It might just be that early on, you just want to assess perhaps their temper, whether they're good-tempered or not quite so good. And then you can expand on that as you get into beekeeping a lot further. But I think a lot of beekeepers don't do it because they weren't taught it when they started. So all I'm doing is I'm just suggesting that you have a little bit of a little bit of assessment. It's a bit like children, really, isn't it? Some of them you like better than others. Records, I think, are important, and I'll be discussing that a little bit later. I think I will anyway. And it helps to be positive as well. Something like finding queens. Don't just give up. Oh, I can never find queens. Yes, I'm going to find a queen, and I think you'll do it. And I think it'll help you with your beekeeping a lot better too. So, whether you like it or not, you will develop a system which is your way of keeping your bees. And I still come across a lot of beekeepers that have been keeping bees for years, and they don't seem to understand that they've got a system. Everyone's got a system. And the great thing about it is they're all unique. Every one of them is different from something else. Why is that? Well, because they're going to be based on lots of things, perhaps the location. It might be that a person in Cornwall keeps their bees differently than somebody in East Anglia, who's differently than, let's say, Ireland or the hills of Wales. Bees vary quite a bit too. There are certainly some bees that you can keep in some places that you very definitely can't keep in others. Perhaps a number of colonies too, because if you've only got 1 or 2 colonies, you may have a different system than if you've got 6 or 10 or 20. And the time available too. If you're only a weekend beekeeper, you may well do things differently than if you're at home all the time, or okay, you're home every day. Let's put it that way. So perhaps you work, you come home and do your beekeeping in the evening. So you'll develop different ways of doing things. But whatever it is, folks, you have exactly what you want, and that will probably be based as well on what you've actually learnt so far. You may well learn some more things, which will mean that your system will develop even further. Mine is still changing after 56 years, so don't be ashamed of anything. Two common sayings. Sorry, I've got to put my head around this webcam. Two common sayings. Ask X number of beekeepers and you get several answers to this one. It could be X number of answers, or X plus Y number of answers, or whatever. Why is that? Well, there's a reason for it. Perhaps you've asked a question and you haven't described things correctly. You may well have used terminology that isn't quite right. You may not have given all the information. You might say to somebody, you've got a problem with a colony, and you've forgotten to tell them that it's queenless, or it's or whatever. Your system that I just told you about may actually vary from the system of the person or the people that you ask the question from. Some perhaps might have a different kind of hive or whatever. It may well be that you ask half a dozen people the same question and they've all got different systems, and they will give an answer based on their system rather than yours. You may well have different knowledge levels as well. It could be that you ask anything from almost another beginner right up to a really experienced beekeeper, and some of those will know a lot more than others. Therefore, they're going to probably come up with different answers. It may well be that all the answers may be either right or wrong, and it may be that all the things you're told are going to work, or none of them will, or a bit of a mixture. But I've always wondered, why on earth ask more than one person anyway? Don't you trust them? I suggest very strongly that you just latch onto one. Don't overdo it, but latch onto one person, a good person, and just use them for bouncing ideas off. As a teacher, I tend to, if somebody asks me a question, I tend to ask a lot of questions because I want to find out where or how that beekeeper or that colony has got into that position in the first place. And I very often find that there's reasons why it's happened. So perhaps somebody's done something that perhaps wasn't the best advice. If they hadn't have done that, then wouldn't have the problem. So they can then think, well, I won't do that again, or I'll do something else. So I tend to ask a lot of questions, which is becoming more and more of a problem, because on several occasions I've had somebody go off and ask somebody else a question, and they said, well, why don't you ask Roger? And they say, well, I have, but I just want to be told what to do. I don't want to know how the colonies got into that position. And I'm finding that more and more. Never used to be the case. I don't quite know why. I think it's probably more to do with the work situation these days, where people don't need to know quite so much information to do their job. Well, another common one is bees don't read the books. And people who say these things, they always seem to think that they're the first person who ever said it. But why don't bees read the books? Well, it's very often because beekeepers don't actually understand what the bees are trying to do. They might do something from a human point of view, and the bees just do what they think in response. And that's really what a lot of the problems are. It's just beekeepers don't actually read the bees a lot of the time. So local help then. Well, it's pretty handy, because I think everybody needs a bit of guidance. It's very difficult just to pick up beekeeping from a book or whatever. I know some do, and I've come across some very good beekeepers who've just got on and done it. But the vast majority do need a bit of help. So try and get somebody who's experienced with sound knowledge. Now, when I say experience, it's very difficult for a newish beekeeper to understand, because there is a saying in beekeeping that somebody who's been keeping bees 40 years may well have made the same mistake 39 times. So just because somebody's kept bees 10, 15, 20, 40 years or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that they are very good. I've come across ever so many beekeepers who've been keeping bees only a couple of years. And as I think I said earlier, they're streets ahead of somebody who's been keeping bees an awful lot longer, simply because they sort of understand it, and they understand the craft, and they move on, and they progress. Some people just get to a certain level and don't seem to be able to get any further. Probably if you get involved with a local association, if you have a quiet word with one or two people, they will probably point you in the right direction. One thing you could do, and I'm probably going to get shot at for this, but I really don't mind. One thing you could do is, if you get the opportunity, just have a quick look at their bees. If they've got some fairly old, well-used hives that are still in good condition, sound condition, and they've obviously been looked after, that will be a clue that they've been involved in beekeeping some time. If they've got everything's absolutely brand new, spick and span, then the chances are that person's only just started keeping bees. And you need hive years under your belt to actually learn. You need to have done quite a lot of wintering, several seasons of wintering, several summers of different conditions. And, you cannot pick it up just straight away. Have a look at the fall honey producing colonies. Are they roughly the same height? Because that will give you a clue if a beekeeper is careful at the sort of bees they keep. And they don't just get any old bees in, some that are going to produce a lot of honey and others that won't produce a lot at all. These things aren't actually definite, but it gives you a little bit of a clue. Let's put it this way: I could probably walk into somebody's apiary and without seeing them handle bees, I could probably tell if they're a reasonable beekeeper or not. Is their apiary reasonably tidy? I don't necessarily mean everything's sort of manicured, all the grass is cut, all the same length and that sort of thing. If the stuff lying around so you can trip over it and it's rotting and that sort of stuff, they're probably not looking after what's inside the boxes very well either. But expect stuff to be stacked up, perhaps outside. Make sure it can't be tripped over or anything like that. Just briefly ask them if they raise their own queens or not. If they do, they're probably going to be quite a reasonable beekeeper. If they buy them in every year or whatever, the chances are they're probably not going to be quite as good and as knowledgeable. A nucleus is a small colony, and there are small hives, and you can see them. I'll give you a photograph. We'll show you a photograph a little bit later. I would expect a good beekeeper to probably have one or two nuclei, which is the term for several of them, plural of several of them. I would expect them. So just have a look, see what they've got. Have a look at their handling. If they're rough with their handling, then they're probably going to be a bit rough with their beekeeping. If they're nice and gentle and they don't wind the bees up, and they don't knock the frames about, then they're probably quite a reasonable beekeeper. If they've got loads and loads of gadgets, and they show you this, and they show you that, and they show you something else that's never been used, they're probably more noise than anything. Most good beekeepers just have what they need, and you can get a little bit of a view of it, but there are so many people in beekeeping who just who are new to it, fresh to it. They know everything in 20 minutes flat, and then go and tell the world. Honeybee life cycles are quite important. You can learn them straight away. Nice and easy to learn. And I've got here the three stages. When the egg hatches into a larva, not that it actually hatches, but let's not worry about that. It's not technically it's not the right term, but beekeepers say hatching from an egg into a larva. Then when the cell gets sealed, and then when the seal emerges. Don't worry too much about drones, which is why I've coloured this in. Worker is reasonably important, but not too much. It takes from the laying of the egg, it takes 21 days for the worker to emerge. There or thereabouts. The queen is the important one for all beekeepers. And I've got in here brackets. These are what you may find in quite a lot of books. A queen cell is sealed on the 9th day and emerges on the 16th. Having kept bees for 56 years, I will go on the slightly more cautious side. I'd knock a day off those. So 3, 8 and 15. All this lot is on Dave Cushman's website, so you don't have to try and copy this down or see the recording. And these are nice and easy to remember because all you do is multiply by 3. So the egg hatches after 3 days. 3 3s are 8, 3 8s are 15. And I know you're all saying, oh, he's wrong, he's wrong. Well, yes, I am. But if you remember 3 3s are 8, 3 8s are 15, you will very definitely remember the 3 figures that you need to know. So that's my bit of humour for the day over. Honest. These are the ones that are important because at swarming time, it's usually, not always, usually when the first queen cell is sealed, that's a trigger for the swarm to leave the colony. And after 15 days, a queen cell emerging. So they are the really important ones. So remember 3, 8, 15. The relevance of this, or some of it anyway, you can tell if a queen has stopped laying and when, because don't forget the egg hatches after 3 days. If you've got no eggs in the colony, that means that the queen stopped laying at least 3 days. Then the age of the larva takes over, but that's a bit further down the road because you need to work that out yourself. But what you can say is a queen very definitely stopped laying 3 days ago. That doesn't necessarily mean she isn't there. It just means that she stopped laying. Worker brood. Don't forget 3, 9, 21. That's in a ratio of 1, 2, and 4. Now that does fluctuate for the time of the year. Earlier in the spring, when it's ramping up, you'll get 1 will be more than that, perhaps 1.5. And in the autumn, when they're ramping down, because they just don't need the brood, that will be lower. And the reason for that is because the worker brood is in the egg stage for 3 days, it's in the larval stage for 6, and the pupa for 12. So that comes out nice and neat, 1, 2, and 4. If you've got no worker brood, the workers emerge after 21 days. So if you've got absolutely no worker brood, you know that the queen stopped laying at least 21 days ago. In most instances during the summer, that means you've either got a problem or you know what the situation is. Don't worry too much at the moment. That you'll pick these things up as you go. A queen cell is sealed for 7 days. Don't forget the difference between 8 and 15. That means if you happen to be a weekend beekeeper, if you've got queen cells in your colony, if you leave them unsealed one weekend, let's say you do your beekeeping on the Saturday, if it's queen cells unsealed on Saturday, it shouldn't be sealed by the next Saturday when you come to inspect your colonies again. And of course, in swarm control, it's important to know when the cells are going to be sealed and when they're going to emerge. These are all approximate. I don't know how far they're out, but they can certainly be a day either way. And the reason for that is we aren't dealing with anything mechanical. We are dealing with biology, and biology varies for whatever reason. Check, give a regular check for healthy brood. The two diseases that I mentioned that are notifiable can be spotted in a frame like this. If you've got sealed brood like that, or unsealed brood, it's just filling the cell up, as this here is. What I'd say to everybody is that at every inspection, the first frame you come across in every colony, just gently shake the bees off. You don't have to shake off anywhere near as many as them, just so you can see the brood. Check on the sealed brood for signs of American foul brood, and unsealed brood for signs of European foul brood. Right. We won't go into disease too much here, but I have got examples of each a little bit later, and you can easily see that there's a problem with them. So just get in the habit and make it just exactly the same as if you were lighting your smoker. Just make it a habit. Just check it. Now, there is a view that there's only a need to check at the first and last inspections of the year. I think that's wrong, because I've seen disease come in very, very quickly. In fact, on one occasion, I was inspecting some, well, I wasn't inspecting, I was doing a demonstration, and I saw about half a dozen cells of European foul brood, EFB, in a colony that was inspected by the bee inspector the week before. Now, that doesn't make me clever or the bee inspector bad. I may not have been there, been visible the previous week. So it can come in quite quickly. I don't want to put the wind up you about notifiable diseases. They are actually very uncommon, to the point where the vast majority of beekeepers will never, ever see them. But that, of course, is a danger, because they're not looking for them. So here's brood pests and diseases. We do have a few minor ones. Well, when I say minor ones, they aren't, they don't result in your colonies being burnt like some of them. They're very minor. They can be managed. You just need a little bit of knowledge and be able to identify. And that's really what it's about. Varroa parasitizes both brood and disease. Everybody's got that, so don't think you've got your one, unless you're in one or two of the islands. I think there's a few peninsulas in Scotland that still haven't got it, but the vast majority of beekeepers have got Varroa. Don't look through your colony and think, oh, I haven't got Varroa, because you can't see it. It's there. We've got two established notifiable diseases, ones that I mentioned. They're both uncommon. And we've got two exotic notifiable pests which are lined up to get at us. One is in Italy at the moment, and has been since 2014. They are both killers of colonies. So we want to try and keep them out if we possibly can. But they're so serious that the government made them notifiable in 2006. So that's how serious the government are taking it. We do have a bee inspection service that will help you, which I'll discuss in another slide or two. But I'll repeat what I've said. Don't get paranoid about disease. Just know what healthy brood looks like. If it doesn't look healthy, just check it out, and I'll give you some clues what you can do a little bit later on. So here is healthy sealed worker brood. That's what you should see in front of you. It's actually an incredibly good good example, because you generally get holes in, or some that's emerged, or all sorts of things like that. That is really good. You won't often come across that, but that's what you're looking at. See, there's no holes. You know, that is a cell. Whoops, hang on, wait just a minute. That is a cell underneath there, the same as all of these others, and that is sealed for pupation. Right. If you've got that, that is, I won't say a minor disease, but it's certainly not really a killer of colonies like some of them can be. So look what we got there. Look what we got here. Look at all these light coloured things. They are all a fungal disease called chalk brood. But that is nasty. That is American foul brood. And if your colony gets that, which is unlikely, but you need to be aware of it, then you've got to contact the bee inspector, and your colony will then get, I'm afraid, killed and then burnt. This is healthy sealed worker brood, and it's really only worker brood that we really need to bother about. Forget drones, forget the queens. That's what it should look like. In this stage here, look at the larva as it's filling the cell up. It's a sort of glistening white, which some people call pearly white. It's got its segments, and it's got a very good shape like this here. If you get that, which is effectively the same thing, so these here are infected with European foul brood. Now, the bee inspector will advise, if it's a bad case, you'll probably get it burnt. Otherwise, there might be treatment for it, but I'm not going to go into that today. If you get to this stage here, remember, white, bright, and curled up tight. If it isn't one of those, you've got a problem. So if it's not white and glistening, it's this sort of color, you've got a problem. If it loses its shape like that, you've got a problem. So check it out. But that's probably all I'm going to say on disease, apart from check it out and see what you come up with. Now, the Bee Inspection Service, this is for England and Wales only. In my opinion, it is overall very good. It's run by the National Bee Unit up in York, and it's split into regions, 8 regions, 7 in England. Wales is all one region. Each one has got their own full-time bee inspector called a regional bee inspector, and they take on summer staff. They're called seasonal bee inspectors. They're part-timers, and they could do another job in the winter or something of that nature. Now, although they don't use it and jump all over your property, they do have a legal right to inspect honeybees. So, and I do know on occasions that they've been turned away. I can't ever remember hearing about the police force being called, but they do have a legal right to go in. It is a free service, which is really good, because it's done beekeeping a lot of good over the years, and it's one of the reasons that our disease level on foul brood is very low worldwide. They do have a website, It might also be called bee base. It's another way of finding it, where they've got quite a lot of information and some photographs too. And you can see I've taken a couple of I've taken one photograph off their website, which they welcome you to do. I do find that it's actually not very good to navigate, but that probably might be an age thing. Please, 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 on behalf of beekeeping, don't abuse it. Don't just call out the bee inspector for almost everything. And I have heard on occasions that poor bee inspector was almost expected to do the beekeeping for the people. Please don't abuse it, because if they're called out for no reason at all, no real reason at all for you, it could mean they're not detecting disease somewhere else. Now, elsewhere, you better check locally. I know the Isle of Man's got a bee inspector, and I know Scotland has got what I think they call a lead bee inspector. If you come from Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland, you better check there as well. I don't believe the Channel Islands have got a bee inspector either. Now, essential equipment. You actually don't need very much at all. So I'm going to suggest a minimum. The catalogues and websites and all the rest are full of all sorts of junk and rubbish that they encourage you to buy, most of which you don't need. In fact, in a few weeks, there will be another webinar, equipment you don't need or something like that. So that might be worth listening to. I suggest very strongly that you buy good quality because if you take something like a hive tool or a smoker, it's a tool, and you wouldn't expect a butcher to buy cheap knives at car boot sale. Buy good quality. I've seen, well, in fact, I've had my jeans cut by the banding that goes around a smoker because it was so sharp. Some hive tools that are available, they're also very sharp as well. You've got to handle these things, you know. Let's be serious. And I suggest that you avoid online. I don't want to do the online people out of any work, but some of the stuff that I've seen, the quality is actually quite poor and surprisingly more expensive than if you buy from the normal suppliers. So buying equipment then, I strongly suggest use the well-known national suppliers or their agents. They do have agents throughout the country. They're okay. The reason is because they are the specialists. I'm fairly certain that some of the stuff you see online is just bought from somewhere and sold. At least if you go to the national suppliers, if they don't make things themselves, they've sourced good quality equipment, or they should have done. So check items for quality, which you can do if you go to an agent, because probably most counties have got agents. And there's more than one way of getting stung in beekeeping, and buying stuff online is probably one of them. There are fairly regular sales. Certainly the two major suppliers, they have 3, 4, 5, might even be half a dozen sales a year. Okay, it might not be quite the right time you need it, but you know, things like frames, hive parts, you can get quite reasonably priced. As far as hives are concerned, probably 25 years ago now, they started selling what are called seconds. Now, they're still good quality. The only difference is, instead of being prime Western red cedar for the hives, not free and all that sort of thing, it's UK grown timber, and you tend to get a few knots, but I found them incredibly good value. and to the best of my knowledge, they're made on the same machinery, and they are less than half price. And that's what you end up getting. And you can see there's a few knots in there. That doesn't matter. As far as the roof is concerned, the cover over the top is exactly the same, whether it's a premium quality or a second. And here's a typical sort of thing you get. You might get a few knots like that. Absolutely no problem at all. And I maintain it could well be better, because that board is nowhere near as likely to split as as one with straight grain. Now, I've checked up on this UK grown timber, and they reckon it's got a life untreated out in the open of 60 years. So that's going to outlast most beekeepers. And if you look after it and keep it dry, it should last an awful long time. You need to feed your bees occasionally. Don't always have to if you don't want to, because you can leave them some honey. But if you need to feed your bees, you need a feeder. Not necessarily one for every hive. I find these little round plastic feeders, they're called rapid feeders. They take 4 points. I find them really good. When you finish with them, you can stack them up. You obviously need to keep them in the dark, otherwise, being plastic, they will degenerate. I find these really good. Making up syrup is nice and easy. In the old days, we used to say 2 pounds of sugar to a pint of water, which is almost spot on for 4 kilos of sugar to 2.5 litres of water. And if you just put them in a bucket or something like that, mix them up, absolutely easy, and shouldn't be beyond most people. A hive strap is, you perhaps only need one, but that's a very useful piece of kit, because you might have to move your bees at any time. I managed with baler twine for years and years and years, and sash cord and all sorts of things like that, which still do the job. But I find these hive straps really good. And the reason the snow's there is because I've looked through my photographs for one of these hive straps, and I couldn't find one. So yesterday I went down to my garden and put a strap round, and it just happened to be a bit of snow on the ground. So these are the ones I like. There's just a flat plate. They're called toggle straps, and there's no moving parts, and you can get these really tight. All the others, they got a sort of ratchet mechanism, so there's moving parts. They're a bit more money, and moving parts have obviously got the problem. I find them really good. And a nucleus hive is, I think, very, very useful. You don't need one, you can get by, but I think a nucleus hive is an incredibly important part of anyone's kit. I suggest a 5 frame. You can get smaller ones, or you can make smaller ones, but I think a 5 frame or perhaps a 6 frame works okay. That's one of my design. I've got the drawings on Dave Cushman's website. I didn't make it, somebody else made it, but I've made them out of all sorts of recycled material, plywood and all sorts of things like that. If you're doing that, make sure the internal dimensions are correct. You'll probably work out why as you go through your beekeeping. External dimensions don't matter too much at all. Now, in the last 15 or perhaps 20 years, there have been some nucleus hives made out of polystyrene, which are called polynukes. I have to say, I don't get on with them too well. There's no need for me to say too much about them now, but I don't get on with them to the point where after 10 years of trying them, at my local beekeeping association, we've taken the decision now to stop using them and go back to wood. Hive tool. Look at the difference between the ends of those two. The one on the bottom is a nice thin end. Look, the top one is less thin, more blunt, call it what you like. Now, what do you got to do with a hive tool? You've got to put it between the gaps of boxes, or in this case, a crown board. If it's got a nice thin end, you can slide it in nice and easy. If it's a blunt end, people wiggle it around, and then you end up with damaging your boxes like that, which then eventually need repair. Smoker, I suggest you always use it. I know people say, "Oh, I never smoke my bees," but every colony's got a right to object to being opened. I suggest you don't buy cheap ones. You may be able to look at them and say, "Oh yeah, that looks the same as that," and one might be 35 or 40 pound, and the other one 15. Don't be fooled, because very often the metal is thinner and they burn through quicker. And at Whisper Green Teach in Apiary, we've had some of the more expensive ones for probably 15 years now, and they are still in very good condition despite the amount of use they get. We bought some of the cheaper ones because we needed some more, and they lasted 2 years, and they just burnt out. Now, a smoker is a tool, beekeeper's tool. Try it. Don't just buy it online. Go somewhere and try it, and make sure you're comfortable using it. It could be, if you've got small hands, that the bellows are big and it tires your hand, or perhaps because they've got a spring inside them to return the bellows, it could be that it's got a very strong spring and it tires your hands. You need to be comfortable in your beekeeping. Gather fuel when you can. I've got I use Touchwood where I can. I think that's on another presentation about that one. But I've got an old rucksack. When I take the dogs out for a walk, I just gather fuel, and I've got bags and bags of it. You don't have to buy smoker fuel. Now, this is one of my sayings: use your smoker just before you need it. Which so many people have said, "Oh, that's a daft thing to say." Yes, it is. But the more you get into beekeeping, the more you'll realize that the bees are telling you things all the time, and you might get one or two just come up onto the frames, and they're saying, "Look, get some smoke into us quick before the rest come." It's not quite like that for a beginner, I know. So perhaps what they tend to do is smoke when it's a bit late and then over smoke. That's okay. All the time you're learning. But I've got it now, and so have most experienced beekeepers, that they tend to smoke just right. Incidentally, when we get new people at Whisper Green, very often somebody turns up and they're brilliant at smoking, and they just got this this ability really, and keep it alight, which is not difficult to do. A lot of people turn it down on the side, put it up on its end, and you should be okay. Camera. Why do you need a camera when you're keeping bees? Simple. Because if you see something that isn't quite right, you can take a photograph of it, and you can either check it out online or send it to somebody and say, "Hey, what's this?" It may well be absolutely no problem whatsoever, or it could be some of the other things that I've shown you. And certainly those last two, the bee inspector will be quite interested. Or it could be just like that, well, there's no problem at all. That's absolutely fine, but a camera is a useful bit of kit. It doesn't have to be a proper camera. It could be on a phone or something like that. And they take some very good photographs, some of them. So keeping records, why keep records? Well, when you get to a certain age, it covers up for bad memory. So that's as good a reason as any. But you need to know what you should be finding next time, because every time you handle a colony, you're perhaps doing something, making an adjustment to the hive, and you expect the bees to respond in a certain way. It should tell you when to make the next visit. If there's no need to make visit for another 9 days, there's no point doing it in 3 days or 5 days or whatever, unless of course you want to and uh, you want to learn. That's absolutely fine. I haven't got a problem with that. Also, equipment required. Perhaps you need a queen excluder or a new roof or an extra super or something like that. Well, your record should be able to help you with that. This is one that isn't mentioned very often in case of illness. But 3 or 4 years ago now, I had an appendicitis, so I whipped off to hospital. I couldn't do any lifting, and if my bees needed handy, as indeed they did, somebody can come in, read my record sheets, and know exactly what's happening in my colonies. Perhaps a bit further down the line, you'll want to keep queen records, perhaps what the mother was, so that would help you with your queen rearing. Colony characteristics, perhaps not at the moment, but certainly later. How calm are they on the comb? How much food do they need? All sorts of things like that. And now, if you treat a colony with anything, I forget quite the wording, but it's something like if it modifies its health or it's something like that, you need to record it, and then you keep those records for 5 years. Now, you could use a veterinary medicines record sheet, or you could do what most beekeepers do, which is just put it on their normal record. So you need to, if you do treat your bees for anything, then you need to record it. Simple records. These are mine. I'm not expecting you to do exactly the same as me. In fact, I encourage you to do your own thing. But this is mine. It's just a sheet for a whole year for a colony, and I've just got a few columns. Date there. Is a queen laying? Yes or no? Now, I've got 3 columns with Y or N, which I just cross out on the sheet. I put them in red here to do the same thing. Is a queen laying? Yes or no? Is she clipped or marked? Yes or no? If she was clipped last time and marked and not this time, then I know we've had what's called a supersedure in between, where a young queen has replaced the old one. If I don't see her at all, I don't put anything, so I know when the last time was that I saw the queen. That's got my queens out of the way. And are there any queen cells? Now, that is relevant to swarming, which I won't go into here. I've then got 2 colonies, one for the 2 columns, one for the temp of the colony, and one for their calmness on the comb. That's really all I do. And then 1 sheet for comments. These are can be downloaded from the Whisper Green website, but really I encourage you to do your own thing. You can then keep, I can keep the sheet in a plastic wallet, document wallet, in a clipboard inside the hive. There it is. Personally, I think records are more to do with the beekeeper than the bees. So you record exactly what you want to record. Doesn't matter if it interests you and you think it helps your beekeeping, just do it. There are record sheets available online, but I think you'll probably find that you'd much rather do your own. That's fine. That's great. At least you're thinking about your beekeeping. So queens and their offspring. Even some beekeepers don't understand this, but most hives have just one queen. Occasionally you could have more than one, but it's usually one. She mates with a number of drones. The scientists tell us normally 10 to 15, can be a lot less. And I think somebody said the record was 60 some odd. Well, whether that's correct or not, I don't know. Now, each one of those drones fathers groups of workers within the hive. These are called patrilines, which the Americans, I think, neatly call subfamilies. So in each colony, you get different groups of workers that were fathered by different drones. They will have different characteristics, sometimes perhaps different genetics. It's now known that the more, beekeepers can't do much about it, but it's now known that the more drones a queen mates with, the more rounded the colony is, because some colonies or some lines are better at doing things than others. So some might be better foragers, some might be better defending, some might be better house cleaners, all sorts of things like that. And the more drones the queen mates with, the more rounded and the more productive the colony is. On the other hand, she is producing drones who are going out and mating with queens from other colonies. So it really is quite a diverse population of bees that we've got. These are what I call British standard mongrels, and a lot of beekeepers have got bees of this type. This was one of mine colonies over 20 years ago now, and if you look at those, they are quite different colours. And if you take those 6 bees there, they're all different in certain ways. That means that they had different fathers, or probably means that they've had different fathers. Now, it's not going to be easy, because if you raise queens from a colony like that, you're just going to get an absolute mishmash. You won't get anything stable. Now, I've mentioned observation earlier. There's a couple of things on this photograph that I'd like to show you, which are the sort of things that you can see on a comb in a hive. If you take, there's 3 bees there feeding each other. Usually it's 2, but 3 feeding each other. This is something that perhaps you can have a look at and check when you've finished here. What are they doing? Well, the 2 things come to mind. One is there is the nectar that's brought in from the field is handed over by the forage bee to a house bee. Could be that. Or there's what's called a food transfer pool, trophallaxis it's called technically, where the bees are feeding each other all the time. In amongst it is a very small amount of the pheromone queen substance. So that's one of the ways that the colony knows that the queen is still in residence. Have a look at that bee there. Not that easy perhaps to look at, especially if you've got a small screen. That bee there has got its wings tightly close together, and I can see on my screen it's sort of a bit grey and downy. That is a young bee, probably only a day or 2 old. That bee there has got its wings further apart. That's probably flown. It's difficult to say how old it is because conditions change, but it's certainly quite a bit older than the first one. That one there has got tattered ends to its wings. That bee has done an awful lot of flying. Have a look that against the one with the cyan arrow that hadn't got the jagged edges. It's difficult to say the difference in the age between those two, but it could be 4 or 5 weeks, something of that nature. Certainly the green one has done an awful lot of flying. So even by looking at a comb, you can actually see what's a lot. You can find out an awful lot about the colony. Now, if you've only got one colony, once you've got bees, providing you don't lose them, of course, you need never ever buy any bees again. You get up to 1,000+ colonies if you want to. Not that I'm suggesting you do, but if you've got bees and you've acquired them from somewhere else, they've probably been split off from another colony in some way, that's really how you make up a new colony. Just take some combs and bees usually from one colony for a small beekeeper, but bigger beekeepers could be several colonies. And then all you do is just simply give it a queen or a queen cell. But going back to what I said earlier, if you do that, then please make sure that your stock comes from the localities. If you haven't got a queen or a queen cell yourself, ask somebody else. We're getting close to the end now. I'll just put this up because I think there's some good points that we can show you. My local association before COVID, we used to have what we call bee crawls. It was a bit like pubs, but take the pubs out and replace them with bees. And this was one of them. And the person with the frame there, Jane, she's one of our members. We went to her house. These are her bees. And there's everybody looking from outside her garden. Anyway, good points are that she's got a hive tool in her hand. If you've got a hive tool, you very often need it. Well, you need it regularly. So keep it there. Don't put it down on another hive or in your pocket or something like that. If you need it, you need it quickly. So keep the hive tool in your hand. She's got a smoker between her knees there, which I think is the best place to keep it, because if your colony needs smoking, it generally needs it in a hurry. If it's between your knees, it's there. Don't worry about burning knees and all sorts of things that people who don't agree with this come up with about walking about with smoker between your knees. Of course, you don't have to. But I've seen so many beekeepers with and demonstrators with they put the smoker down, somebody kicks it over, it goes out, or they can't find it or whatever. It's there between your knees. 3 supers there. And if you just put them down on a flat roof or flat surface, or turn the roof upside down and put them inside, as some people do, you can crush a lot of bees. And the propolis, which is the gum that they bring in from trees to glue the hive up and coat the inside of the hive with, gets all around the inside of the roof, and that then sticks on next time. Next time we'll take it off. So if you put it, in this case as a WBC, as point contact there, if it was a single walled hive, National Smith, commercial, Langstroth or whatever, just flip the roof upside down and do exactly the same thing. So that's another good point. Until you find your queen, inspect the frame above the queen above the brood chamber. If the queen falls off, she goes straight down to the box and not lost. But if you swing round and talk to somebody or whatever, queen drops off on the ground, you could lose the queen and tread on or anything like that. When you're handling colonies, try to make sure you keep your back straight. A lot of people just bend over and crouch over. If you do that, your back will start aching. So keep your back nice and straight. Just get the habit of doing it. And finally, if you take your supers off, keep the crown board on top of the supers. because if you, on many occasions I've had this happen, if you've got face of bees open here and another there, they might be absolutely docile, gentle, call them what you like, placid. All of a sudden, if one gets fired up, for some reason, the other one does as well. And you're dealing with bees from two different places. So just cover them up. Anyway, that's it. Beekeeping is fun. Thanks very much. Any questions?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Roger. An hour and 40 minutes. If that's not value for money, I don't know what is.
Crikey. Well, I'll tell you why, because there's a new talk for me, you see. And I just didn't know. Apart from that, I just got the vibes that an incredibly good audience. So I thought I'd explain it a bit more than I would normally.
Oh, there's definitely a stickability in our audience.
Yeah, okay.
Lena wants to know, Lena wants to know, what is the best time in the year to start asking around for bees if you'd like to start keeping them?
Oh, very definitely spring these days. Pre-Varroa, if people gave up, it was usually towards the end of the season, and you could generally get some quite cheap bees towards the end of the season. Problem is with Varroa now, winter losses are a lot higher than they were, and I hate it when there's a new beekeeper first year, and they get their bees in July or whatever, and then they lose them for perhaps no fault of their own. I would ask around locally and put your name down, and a good, decent local beekeeping association should either be able to help you out with bees produced locally, or perhaps some member will. I came across one beekeeping association that let beginners have a nucleus on condition that they replaced it when they could, and that seemed to be quite a good way of doing things. So yeah, if you go too early, what you'll be forced down the road is probably buying them commercially. If you buy them commercially in a lot of instances, I think they will be imports, which I certainly wouldn't advise. Certainly not for a beginner anyway.
Kind of on the same sort of line then, Rachel wants to know about the advantages and disadvantages of starting with a swarm rather than purchasing a nuke.
Right. A lot of people will advise you against a swarm. Actually, I think it's a brilliant way of starting because, well, let me tell you what the objections usually are. One is there's an absolute outside chance of it being infected with foul brood. But all the years I've been keeping bees, I've only ever known that happen once. But I've known an awful lot of colonies that have been nuclei that have been sold that have got foul brood. So that one's straight out the window. The other one is, they can be bad-tempered and this. Well, so they can, but so can some nukes. And I've seen nukes been bad-tempered. In fact, I knew one person who sold nukes, and the bees were nothing to write home about. And what they did was they milked the flying bees off. And of course, it's the flying bees that sting. And sell them. Week later, somebody comes and says, "Oh, these are a bit hot, aren't they?" Well, when they left here, it must be you doing something wrong. So that's also knocked that one out of the wind. But if you can take in a swarm, especially if you've got somebody who can help you, you can learn an awful lot. You can learn how a swarm builds up. You can learn how to manage it. You can do far more than by buying a little 5-comb nucleus of really soft bees. If they've come commercially, the chances are, because the queens are prolific, they just explode. And they build up so fast that the poor beginner sometimes can't even get them in the hive quick enough. So yeah, I think the swarm's a brilliant way of starting, but you do need somebody to help you out. I've got information on Dave Cushman's website about hiving a swarm. Go and have a look at that, and it'll give you some of the ideas of things you can do. But yeah, I'd definitely go for a swarm.
Excellent. John asks, how would you classify an aggressive colony as opposed to it's you just not handling them incorrectly and getting them agitated if you're a beginner?
Yeah, that's actually quite difficult. I'll have to give this one a bit of a thought.
I mentioned if they meet you at the gate, that could be a sign. And also perhaps finding somebody in your local association that is experienced at handling them to go through them with you to see if they get the same.
I think so. I've been called out ever so many times by people saying my bees are so hot I can't handle them. I've handled them no trouble at all. And then I'll say, well, okay, you handle the next one. Oh, crash back. And there's your problem. This is actually not a very easy question to answer. Certainly go along to local beekeeping association, have a look, see how other people handle colonies first, which personally I think you should be doing anyway, not just pitching straight in and buying bees and start beekeeping. And what you often find is that sometimes a colony is normally quite gentle. All of a sudden it gets fired up. It could be the handling. Just have a look, see how people handle bees. But in general, if you give them a little bit of smoke, they should be fine. I know it hasn't answered the question. It's not an easy one to answer.
Next question from Robin. We've had a couple of questions about Varroa actually and management of Varroa. Robin asks about the techniques of managing bees rather than chemically treating them to treat for Varroa. And Janet asks about baby oil to control Varroa.
Yeah, I think all these oils, I think they've been scientifically just proven now. They used to have food grade mineral oil, and give them a try. If they work, fine. But I've no experience of them. But as I understand it, the scientists have had a look and haven't made anything of it, because they used to fog this food grade mineral oil, didn't they? And I don't know where these things come from. But anyway.
And I pointed Robin to the Dave Cushman website for things like queen trapping and brood breaks and things for treating Varroa.
Yeah. Quite honestly, Richard, that's sort of beyond this level of a webinar.
Yeah, as with the next one, unfortunately, Martin talks about queen rearing. That's perhaps for a different talk. Another one, Joe asked.
Well, what I will briefly say is that a lot of beekeepers and speakers will make it sound incredibly complicated, but queen rearing is actually simple, and every beekeeper is doing it. Every time they do a swarm control manipulation, they're queen rearing. So, at that level, it is actually quite simple. But we will be doing some later on that anyway.
And so I've got one on smoker fuel and egg boxes. And does that affect the bees with the production process of the egg boxes?
Personally, I don't bother with egg boxes. I've seen people just put a couple of little bits in the smoker. I've seen people with a few dried leaves and a little bit of dried moss. Get yourself some decent smoker fuel. I use Touchwood. If you get wood chippings, what I tend to do is put them in something like a seed tray or a shallow tray, put them in the greenhouse or conservatory, get them really dried out. But there's a little bit of a technique with needed with lighting a smoker. Don't fill it up and then light the top, which a lot of people do. This is how I do it. Screw up newspaper, light it, put it in the bottom. On top of that, put something that's going to burn nice and easy. Dried grass, hay, perhaps a bit of straw. Get that going and then put some more solid material in on top. Now, the easy way is when you have finished with the smoker, just lay it on its side, let it go out, put a bit of grass in the nozzle, lay it on its side. You get a lot of material inside that's partly burnt. That is brilliant for setting your smoker off next time. Right, once you then get that alight, then I use things like the dried wood chippings I was telling you about, or Touchwood, and they work. Touchwood is brilliant because it burns for a long time, and it's a coolish smoke. I know people use cat litter and all sorts of stuff like that, but there's so much free material out there. Use it. Don't use sawdust because all it does is just well, two things with sawdust. It starves it of oxygen, one thing, and it blows sawdust out of the nozzle. So, yeah.
Super. And then I think the last question is, how many spare supers would you have ready for the summer with a new colony?
Oh, right. Depends how big the colony is, depends how good the summer is. But I think it's it also depends what area you're in, because some parts of the country are very marginal for bees, and you're going to struggle to get the bees out of the first super, probably the second super. But if you're in a good area, I would reckon, certainly for a beginner's point of view, to aim at 3 supers per colony. Once you get established, you might need to go 3.5 to 4. You'll pick it up. See the sort of yields that people get locally, and reckon on certainly a national hive about £25 of honey per super. So if people around you are getting £100 of honey, you're going to need 4 supers.
And the very final one is, a couple of people have asked, what is Touchwood?
Right. Right. Tree branches, smallish branches, they get a fungus, and they break off, and they're ever so light, especially oak trees, and you can just break that up and use that in your smoker. I've probably got some somewhere, but it took me a few minutes to find it, Richard. So I can't do it. I'll tell you what. If they're really good and they come to the next one at 7:30, I'll find it and I'll put it on the end of that so that they can see.
Great, but
Right.
it's a crumbly wood, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a crumbly. You just break it up, nice and easy. It's I think it's some sort of fungus that breaks it up.
Super. That's it for the questions then, Roger. Thank you very much. Just to remind people that we've got our Introduction to Beekeeping Day course on the 13th of March. That's available to book through the BIBBA website, which takes you to Eventbrite. £15 for that. It's going to be a great day run by Roger. Great value for £15 as well. Roger, that's based on lots of experience of courses run elsewhere.
We've run that course, or slightly modified version of 15 years running. For very popular, and I should think most of these people could come at 7:30 tonight for the other one if they wanted to.
Yeah, excellent. We've had a request that you change your braces for the next one as well. So, so off you go, costume change. Thanks, Roger.
Okay, cheers, and bye-bye, everybody, and thanks for listening.